Do you believe it? A simple janitor, after 15 years of quietly sweeping the floors, had been silently collecting every fragment of information, every piece of truth, and one day, with nothing more than a thin sheet of paper in her hand, she brought down a CEO right in front of the entire board of directors. They only ever called her Miss Linda. No one remembered her last name. No one addressed her by the name she wished. To them, she was nothing more than a cleaner, invisible like the carpet they stepped on every day. But what none of them knew was this: Linda held secrets powerful enough to change the destiny of Center Holdings. Why would a woman accept a cleaning job for 15 years in the very company her husband had founded? Why didn't she step forward sooner? And what made her endure years of mockery, dismissive glances, and quiet humiliation, just to wait for one single moment? Was it hatred that kept her there? Or was it part of a plan greater than anyone could ever imagine? In today's story, you'll hear things that have never appeared in any news report. 1. How the one who was most despised turned out to be the one with the greatest power. 2. Why 15 years of silence carried more weight than any argument. 3. And the moment when a room full of directors, vice presidents, and lawyers had to bow their heads before a woman they had dismissed as invisible only yesterday. But this is not just a story about a power reversal. It is a chilling lesson for all of us. Never underestimate the ones who stand silently behind the door. Before we begin, I want you to ask yourself, 1. If you had the chance to witness a truth hidden for 15 years, would you have the patience to keep silent like Linda? 2. And if you are in a position of leadership, are you certain that the person you walk past every day is not the very one holding your fate in their hands? Stay until the very end of this video, because only when you witness with your own eyes the unmasking inside the boardroom will you understand why Linda chose silence for 15 years and why she needed only 3 words to make the CEO leave the building. Do not look away, because this story will forever change the way you see any so-called invisible person around you. Before the massive glass walls of Center Holdings reflected the sunlight as a symbol of power, it all began in a small kitchen with nothing more than an old wooden table, a few scraps of paper, and the weary glow of a yellow lamp. Linda sat there, pen in hand, her gaze quiet yet unwavering. Across from her was Johnson, her husband, a sun-worn man, his hands calloused from years of long hauls on freight trucks. Curtis Banning, Johnson's old friend, would occasionally stop by, bringing with him the connections he proudly called the keys to contracts. But in truth, the real foundation of the company was built on Johnson's daring spirit and Linda's meticulous calculations. Johnson carried the essence of a man born to work and push forward. He knew every road, every steep bend on the interstate. He knew the cost of each delivery down to the very last minute. To him, logistics wasn't just moving goods from point A to point B. It was the quiet heartbeat of commerce. Linda, on the other hand, was different. She was never loud, never one for speaking too much at gatherings, but she saw what many overlooked, the numbers. To others, they were just dry paperwork. But to Linda, they were the language of risk, of opportunity, of the future. One evening, after Johnson returned from a long trip, Linda placed a check in front of him. It was the small inheritance her father had left her. Others might have used it to buy a home, or at least to live more comfortably, but not Linda. She pushed the check across the table and said softly, "Put your name on the papers. I'll stand behind you. No one needs to know I'm a shareholder. I believe in you. As long as we walk this path together." Johnson sat in silence for a long time, his eyes flickering between worry and resolve. He knew this wasn't just money. This was trust, Linda's entire life placed in his hands. And so, a dream of entrepreneurship was born right there in that little kitchen. The early days of Center Holdings had no glittering lights, no marble-floored offices. They had only a single rented room, 2 outdated telephones, and a fax machine that was constantly jammed. Linda was the accountant, the contract drafter, and quietly registered a separate legal entity to protect the family from risks Johnson might not have foreseen. Meanwhile, Johnson was out on the road chasing every potential client, securing every small contract he treated like gold, and their efforts bore fruit. Center Holdings soon rose as a new star in the regional transport industry. Big contracts appeared, revenues soared, and partners celebrated with increasingly lavish banquets. Curtis Banning reveled in his role as the connector. Johnson immersed himself even deeper in the work, while Linda, as always, silently managed the cash flow, combing through every line of every contract, a shield invisible yet constant. But every success carries its price. Just when everything seemed destined to rise higher, disaster struck without warning. One night run, one exhausted driver, one fatal curve. Johnson never returned. The news ripped through the already pressure-laden air. The funeral felt colder than Linda had ever imagined. Curtis stood and spoke about achievements, about contracts, about numbers, but hardly anyone spoke of Johnson as a man. And no one at all mentioned Linda, the woman who had poured all her trust and inheritance into building the foundation they now stood on. Not long after, Curtis began showing his true face. He quietly signed new documents, erased Johnson's name from the records, and acted as if Linda had never existed in the company's history of power. He believed that a small, brown-skinned woman with no title would automatically vanish from the map of influence. But he was wrong. Linda remained silent. She didn't hire lawyers immediately, didn't demand her rights, didn't cause a scene. She knew some battles could never be won by rushing in. She held the original contracts, notarized transfer papers, and the receipts Curtis could never erase. Linda understood that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in charging into the fight, but in waiting until the truth becomes so heavy that no one can deny it. And it was that decision, to stay silent, to remain in the shadows, to observe, that marked the beginning of the next 15 years. Years in which Linda turned her mop into a lens of memory, transformed every corridor into a stage for truth to surface, and reshaped herself from an invisible shadow into the living witness of every mistake made by those who believed themselves untouchable. Time passed, but the loss never faded. Linda still remembered every line of Johnson's face, every night they sat together at that old wooden table, mapping out their future. But now, Center Holdings, their shared creation, had become a cold, distant tower, ruled by people Linda knew cared nothing about the true value of work or of human dignity. Years later, on an afternoon no different from countless others, Linda came across a job notice pinned to the community board. Just one simple line: now hiring, night shift janitor at Center Holdings headquarters. No experience required. Linda stopped and stared at the paper for a long time. Someone else walked by, tore off a small tab at the bottom to call later, but Linda was different. Her heart pounded, not from worry, but from a strange sense, as if this was the very door she had been silently waiting for. That night, Linda sat alone in her small room. In front of her were no longer contracts or ledgers, but a modest job application, a false name, an address borrowed from an acquaintance, a resume listing common labor jobs no one would ever bother to verify. Each line she wrote became like a new coat, erasing her old identity, preparing her to re-enter the world she once built, but this time in its lowest role. 2 days later, Linda walked into the interview. The young HR officer across the table had likely never heard of Johnson's name, and certainly had no idea who Linda was. All they saw was a thin, middle-aged woman with a calm face, dressed plainly. The interview lasted barely 10 minutes. A few perfunctory questions. Are you willing to work nights? Any health problems? Do you know how to use cleaning tools? Linda nodded, answered briefly, her voice low and steady. The result: we'll be in touch soon. 2 days after that, the phone rang. A stiff voice said, "Welcome to the Center Holdings night shift janitorial team." Linda quietly smiled. In that moment, she knew. The game had begun. That evening, Linda slipped into a brand new gray uniform, her cheap shoes still stiff at the heel. She walked through the grand lobby, past the gleaming logo mounted on the towering wall. Other employees hurried by without a glance. Linda pushed her cart heavy with chemicals, her mop squeaking across the tile floor. No one knew that this ordinary woman had once laid the foundation of the very company they worked for. No one realized that from that moment on, every hallway, every room, every careless word would no longer slip into oblivion. Linda had returned, not as a shareholder, not as the founder's wife. She returned as a shadow, to listen, to see, to record, and to wait for the day the light would finally shine. Linda's first days at Center Holdings passed so quietly that people assumed she was nothing more than a harmless shadow, silently pushing her clattering cart from floor to floor. But in that silence, she began a long, relentless surveillance, steady as drops of water cutting through stone. Her job seemed simple: mop the floors, empty trash bins, clean restrooms, and polish the conference room glass. But for Linda, each action was an excuse to be in the right place at the right time. While wiping stains from a meeting table, she caught half-joking remarks from directors. While emptying office trash cans, she found scraps of paper covered with confidential notes. While spraying cleaner on the lobby glass, she observed the arrogant glances of those who thought the world revolved around their business cards. Year after year, Linda became the building's invisible eyes and ears. No one suspected that behind the faded uniform was a mind recording every detail, every word. She began to take notes. At first, just a few short lines on scraps of paper. Over time, they grew into a thick black notebook, always hidden in an old steel cabinet in the basement, where no one ever bothered to look. Every page carried a date, time, department, names, and exact quotations. One March day: "We can cut the warehouse staff bonuses. They won't dare complain. Wexler to CFO, room 508. One June day: "Work accident. Employee slipped in the warehouse. No incident report filed. Brenda witnessed. One August day: "Heard Wexler sneer, 'Let the janitors clean it up.' That's what they're paid for." I was standing right there, page after page, detail after detail, things most dismissed as trivial. But to Linda, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, a company rotting from its roots. Every night shift became a crime scene log. As the hallway lights dimmed to a faint yellow glow, Linda pushed her cart, pausing at half-open doors. In a conference room, she heard Wexler boasting with cruel laughter that he had stacks of job applications, so if any worker complained about wages, just toss them out and bring in someone else. The echo of executives' laughter that followed cut like knives through the hope of anyone who still believed. On another night, Linda witnessed Terrence Doyle, a warehouse manager, being called to HR and then vanished from the building within a week. His only crime was questioning wage discrepancies. No farewell, no goodbyes, as if he had never existed. Linda quietly wrote down, "Terrence Doyle, terminated for daring to ask." The pain of others became Linda's evidence. She did not cry, did not lash out. It all hardened into cold, precise lines in her black book. 15 years gave Linda mastery of every corner of the building. The hallway on the 6th floor creaked underfoot. The microwave in the 8th floor break room sparked if the door was slammed. Most importantly, she knew which rooms were the crucibles of ruthless decisions. She heard it all, saw it all, leaving nothing out. Over time, Linda's silence became the perfect disguise. At first, new employees greeted her, "Good morning, Miss Linda." But within months, they too learned to ignore her, treating her like part of the wall. That invisibility became her ideal cover. Sometimes she overheard outright mockery. Douglas Fairbanks, a vice president drenched in cologne, once chuckled to his assistant, "Funny how someone can work here their whole life and not even have a desk." The words landed in Linda's ears. Instead of reacting, she bent her head and kept polishing the glass. Cold, but inside, a sharp black slash etched itself across another page. Every slight, every ruthless decision, every mocking laugh, all became documents. In the massive archive Linda was building, she never needed to shout in protest. Time itself was her most loyal ally. By the end of the first decade, Linda held a secret vault, photocopied contracts, suspicious invoices, and recordings of late-night meetings. An empire that seemed untouchable was now being exposed, crack by crack, by the very woman they dismissed as nothing. And at the close of each shift, Linda would open her black notebook and write a few more lines. Each line was a scar, a silent vow. When the time comes, the truth will speak for me. 15 years passed. Center Holdings swelled into a grand conglomerate, luxurious on the outside, hollow within. And in the shadows between those cold, lined pages, Linda had become the invisible recorder, the only one who knew the company's true face. One late night, close to midnight, Linda left the building through the back gate as she had done many times before. The cart had been neatly locked in the supply closet, her faded uniform still dust-specked on her shoulder. But instead of driving straight home, she took her old car out of the city center and headed for a small roadside diner. The diner was nearly empty, only a few long-haul drivers sipping black coffee. Linda chose a secluded table in the corner where the yellow light fell dimly enough that no one would notice. A few minutes later, a middle-aged man entered, gray suit, loosened tie, a black leather briefcase gripped in his hand. He was Elliot Miles, the lawyer Linda had trusted for many years. Without formal greetings, Linda slid a USB drive and a black-covered notebook toward him. Elliot flipped through the pages, reading each neat line of dates, times, names, and quotations. Every page felt like a blade. Then he opened his laptop and plugged in the USB. Images, invoices, and audio recordings played softly, mocking laughter, orders to cut funds, emails redirecting illicit bonuses. The clink of spoons against cups continued in the diner, but at that corner table the air thickened. Elliot fell silent for a long moment, then exhaled softly. "Linda, once this comes to light, that whole building will shake." Linda took a sip of her cold coffee, her voice steady. "It is already shaking. They just do not realize it yet." Elliot leaned back, studying the woman before him, the woman who had lived as a shadow for 15 years but held more truth than anyone. He nodded slowly. "All right, I will begin drafting the papers, but you must be certain. When the time comes, do not hesitate." Linda answered briefly, "I have waited long enough. When this fire bursts, they will have nowhere to run." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, with only the low hum of country music from the old radio. Then Elliot closed the notebook and put it into his briefcase. "The plan will be simple. Let them walk into their own trap. We only need to prove it, and let the truth speak for itself." Linda gave a small smile. For 15 years, she had cleaned up everything. Now it was time to clean out an entire system. That afternoon, the third-floor hallway of Center Holdings was empty. Linda pushed her cleaning cart, her mind still weighed down by the thick pages of her black notebook. And then she came upon a sight that made her hands freeze. In the middle of the carpeted corridor, right outside the main conference room, lay a paper plate smeared with chocolate, a half-eaten slice of birthday cake, a plastic fork stuck upside down, frosting seeping into the fibers. No one bothered to pick it up. No one thought it strange. Linda exhaled lightly, bent down, and began cleaning as she always did. But inside, she knew this wasn't just trash. This was a message, a cruel joke from those who saw her presence as nothing more than a walking garbage bin. "You missed a spot." The voice cut sharply through the air. Linda looked up and saw Thomas Wexler, the young CEO in a perfectly fitted suit, standing at the end of the hallway, hands in pockets, a smirk pulling at his lips. The light behind him cast a long shadow that nearly swallowed the corridor. "Excuse me, what did you say?" Linda asked, her voice low but steady. "Right there." Wexler walked slowly forward, pointing at the carpet. "Guests are arriving soon. Try cleaning it again. I don't want a single stain in their sight." Linda followed his finger. The carpet was spotless, gleaming under the ceiling lights. Not a trace of dirt. Yet Wexler's gaze bore into her with the authority of command. Then he laughed, a sound half mocking, half contemptuous. "Sometimes I think you people just pretend to clean, just to sit there and collect a paycheck." Linda straightened, still holding the paper plate in her hand. She asked slowly, "You people? Who exactly do you mean, sir?" Wexler flicked his hand dismissively. "Don't be so sensitive. I mean, if I paid you a little more, maybe you'd find the stains before I did." The words hung in the cold air. Linda didn't reply. She simply nodded once. "I'll make sure it's clean." Wexler clapped his hands together, sharp and loud. "Good. Exactly what I wanted to hear." He turned on his heel, footsteps striking the floor in rhythm, as if he had just disciplined a subordinate. Linda watched him go, her face unreadable. But inside, the cord had stretched to its breaking point. That night, when most employees had gone, Linda quietly pushed her cart to the 6th-floor records room. From her pocket, she pulled an access card, carelessly left behind months earlier by a manager. The door clicked open, fluorescent lights spilling over shelves stacked high with files. Linda moved quickly, her hand reaching straight for the folder she had marked long ago. Pages flipped, numbers surfaced, and then the proof she had waited years for appeared. The latest bonus report. Her eyes froze on a single line. Performance bonus, Thomas Wexler, $55,000. Beneath it, a cold annotation. Cut meal stipends for drivers, reduce overtime pay, freeze raises for maintenance and janitorial staff. Linda photographed each page, tucked them into a file, then restored the folder exactly as it had been. All of it done in silence, with only the hum of the air conditioner and the steady beat of her heart. As she stepped out of the room, Linda paused before the glass wall bearing the company logo. The stain from that morning had been scrubbed away, but the stain on its leadership could never be hidden. She closed the door. Her hand still gripping the file, her eyes were no longer those of a silent janitor. They were the eyes of a witness ready to become the judge. The next morning, the basement locker room clattered with the sound of metal doors slamming shut and shoes slapping against the tiled floor. Linda had just hung up her coat when she noticed an unusual silence in the corner. Cynthia, a fellow janitor nearly 10 years younger, sat slumped on a wooden bench, her hands covering her face. Her shoulders shook uncontrollably. The phone in her hand still glowed with a message from the hospital. Injury requires monitoring. "My son, accident last night," Cynthia said through sobs. "I asked for 1 day off to go to the hospital. HR said they're short-staffed. If I miss my shift, I'll be written up." Linda stayed quiet. On the shift board hanging by the door, Cynthia's name was filled in wall to wall with no room to move. Red letters screamed across the paper. No shift changes without prior approval. It looked less like a policy and more like a decree. The cramped room smelled of bleach, the harsh fluorescent light reflecting off Cynthia's pale, worried face. A tear slid down onto her roughened hands. In that moment, Linda saw with complete clarity all the deductions, all the distorted bonus reports she had documented for 15 years. These were no longer numbers. They had taken shape in a mother terrified of not being at her son's side. Linda sat down next to her. She didn't offer hollow words like, "Stay strong." Instead, she handed Cynthia a tissue and a small bottle of water. Nothing more. But her eyes said enough. "I understand." She stood, gently pulled open the locker room door. The hallway outside was empty, the Center Holdings logo faintly blurred in the glass. Linda reached into her pocket, pulled out her old phone, and dialed a familiar number. On the other end, Elliot's deep voice answered. "Linda?" "It's time," she said, her tone steady, but weighted like stone. A brief silence. Then Elliot asked, "Are you certain? Once this starts, there's no turning back." Linda looked down at her worn shoes, recalled the discarded cake plate from yesterday, Wexler's mocking laugh, and finally Cynthia's tear-reddened eyes. "I'm certain," she said. "I've cleaned all my life. Now it's time to clean them out." She ended the call, slid the phone back into her pocket. Before leaving, Linda scribbled a short line on a slip of paper and placed it on the shelf near Cynthia. "Go to your son. The rest we'll handle." No signature, none needed. As the door closed behind her, Linda pushed her cart into the hallway. The wheels rolled across the carpet with a steady hum, like the ticking of a clock beginning its countdown. In the building where people had long mistaken her for a shadow, the glass was now full, and this time, nothing could stop the flood. Tuesday morning, exactly 9:55 a.m., the 8th floor of Center Holdings gleamed under the crystal chandelier suspended above the boardroom. A long walnut table sat in the center, its polished surface gleaming not from cleanliness, but from display. 12 leather chairs were arranged around it. At the head sat Thomas Wexler, suit perfectly fitted, tie loosened as if he owned the very air in the room. "Let's begin," Wexler said, his tone distracted yet arrogant. To his right sat Meredith Chandler, his trusted aide. To his left, Curtis Banning, once a co-founder, now gray-haired, his eyes still calculating. The other directors sat scattered, laptops glowing, presentation slides ready. All of them believed this was just another routine quarterly meeting. None of them knew that in a few minutes, their world would collapse. The door opened. Linda walked in. No longer in her faded gray uniform, no cart, no worn-down shoes. Today she wore a deep blue blazer, a crisply pressed white shirt, and polished black leather shoes. She walked slowly, but each step was firm, carrying an air unlike anything they had ever seen. "Excuse me," Wexler frowned. "We're in session. Cleaning staff is only allowed in after hours." Linda stopped, placed a file on the table. Her voice was calm. I'm not here to clean. The room froze for a beat. Meredith tilted her head, voice sharp. Do you have an appointment? Who allowed you in here? Linda looked straight ahead. I have an appointment with the shareholders. A flicker of confusion. Then the door opened again. A middle-aged man in a dark suit, leather briefcase in hand, stepped in. He introduced himself, voice steady but resolute. I am Elliot Miles, legal counsel representing Mrs. Linda Jenkins, the principal shareholder of Center Holdings. Chairs scraped, murmurs spread across the table. Wexler shot to his feet, face flushing red. What kind of joke is this? Elliot opened his case, drew out a stack of documents and laid them on the table, each bundle marked with colored tabs. These are the founding contracts, transfer papers, and notarized certificates granting Mrs. Linda Jenkins voting authority following the passing of her husband Johnson, all verified as legally binding. Curtis Banning stiffened, muttering under his breath, Impossible. I remember. Linda turned toward him, her gaze cold as steel. You remember, Curtis. You signed alongside Roland that day. Curtis fell silent, his hand tightening around his glass. Linda stepped forward, her voice low but clear. For 15 years, you thought I was nothing more than a shadow in the hallway. You laughed, dismissed, and ignored the people who carried the real weight of this company. I saw it all. Every inflated bonus, every shift cut, every drop of sweat traded for your indifference. She stopped directly in front of Wexler's chair. I watched you turn the company my husband built into a stage for your own ego. Wexler gave a sharp, forced laugh, trying to look composed. This is a mistake, a fraud. No one in this room believes a word you're saying. Elliot cut in, his tone unshakable. This isn't about belief. It's the law. Mrs. Linda has the authority to convene and to vote. And today, she calls for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. The room erupted in shock. Some directors ducked their heads into screens, pretending to be busy. Others exchanged wary glances. Wexler slammed his hand on the table, face blazing. You don't know what you're doing. You have no experience running a company. You're just... Linda interrupted, her voice calm but blade sharp. I am the one who stayed silent for 15 years to witness. The one who gathered enough evidence, enough witnesses, enough paper. And, most importantly, I am this company. You are only a passerby. Elliot distributed sealed envelopes to the board. The proposal has been signed. By law, it takes immediate effect. The door swung open. 2 security guards stepped in, saying nothing, simply waiting. The air grew heavy. Wexler's eyes darted around the table, searching for an ally. Not one voice rose. Meredith quietly closed her laptop, stood, and whispered, I have another appointment. Wexler snarled, You'll regret this. He snatched up his phone, slammed the folder shut, and stormed toward the door. The door closed behind him. Silence filled the boardroom. Linda turned to the remaining members. Her voice softened, but her resolve did not. I did not come for revenge. I came to begin again. And the first step is to listen to those who have been ignored the longest. A young director, Jonas Evers, slowly raised his hand. Then, what do you want us to do? Linda smiled faintly, closing the file. Start by staying silent. And listen. The rest, we will build together. Beyond the glass walls, the midday light spread across, reflecting the calm face of a woman once dismissed as invisible. But now, she was the center of the room. And every gaze knew. The order had changed. Monday morning, at 9:30 sharp, the third-floor auditorium of Center Holdings filled faster than anyone expected. An internal message with just one short line, all staff meeting at 9:30, voluntary attendance, had spread like fire across dry grass. No one knew exactly what was about to happen, only that the sender was Linda, the woman the whole building had only ever seen with a mop, now signed with the title owner. Rows of chairs stretched across the room. Truck drivers sat beside office staff, janitors beside finance employees in crisp shirts. The boundaries of rank and role disappeared in that space, but suspicion remained. Whispers passed. Is this just another PR stunt? A janitor turning into the owner? Sounds impossible. 9:30. Linda entered. No microphone, no slide deck, only a deep blue blazer, a calm gaze, and a small notebook in her hand. The room fell silent. unlike any HR meeting of slogans before. First, Linda began, her voice low but steady. I want to thank you. For years, most of you didn't know who I was. That doesn't matter. What matters is that because of your work, Center Holdings still stands today. No applause, only an unusual quiet. But it was that silence that made people listen harder. The first hand rose. Alonzo, a veteran driver, voice hoarse from endless shifts. Is it true? We'll really get our overtime back? Or is this just another promise? Linda nodded. Not just returned. Every overtime hour withheld over the last 2 quarters will appear on this Friday's paycheck. You'll see it with your own eyes. You don't need to take my word for it. The room buzzed. Glances shifted. Doubt flickered into sparks of hope. A woman from HR stood. Deborah, her face worn from years of signing off on cuts. Her question trembled, but was firm. And what about insurance? Every year, more is cut, and staff carry the cost. Linda did not flinch. We're reviewing everything. This time, every single one of you will get a survey to choose the plan that fits. No more decisions made behind closed doors on your behalf. From the back, a customer service employee stood abruptly. And those fired without cause. Will anyone be cleared? Linda paused, scanning the room, then spoke. Every case will be reviewed. Those wrongfully dismissed will have their dignity restored. I can't promise everyone will return, but the truth will be put back where it belongs. The answer silenced the room. It wasn't the hollow assurance they were used to. It was a responsible vow. Then a younger voice spoke up. An intern, still unsteady. Sorry. Are you really the owner of this company? Linda smiled gently. I have always been part of it, but for 15 years I chose to remain silent, to observe. From today, I'll be here, not as an owner above you, but as someone walking alongside you. The words made many sit straighter. They weren't ready to fully believe, but something in the air shifted. It no longer felt like a mandatory meeting, but like a moment opening for real. Linda closed her notebook, her voice dropping deeper. If you speak, I will listen. If you work, you will be respected. The room sank into a new kind of silence. Not the silence of fear, but of hearts daring to hope again. A fragile spark, but lit nonetheless. In the front row, Cynthia, the same woman who had once broken down in the locker room over her injured son, rose. Her eyes were still red, but her gaze firm. She stepped forward, took Linda's hand, and said nothing. That grip was stronger than any applause. Someone at the back whispered, Maybe. This really is a new beginning, another replied. Or just another promise. Let's wait and see. And it was that uncertainty, balanced between belief and doubt, that planted a restless question in every mind. Could Linda truly do what she said? Could she change a system hardened by years of neglect? No one left the room with a clear answer, but everyone left with the same question hanging in their heads. Right after the all-hands meeting, Linda refused to let that fragile spark of hope fade. She went straight to work. On the desk of her new office, instead of framed photos or certificates, she placed only a thick notebook and a handwritten note. Fairness is a basic right. The first step, return what had been taken. That Friday, when payroll hit employee accounts, hundreds of workers noticed a new line. Overtime reimbursement. Last 2 quarters. The sums were not small. Some truck drivers clutched their heads. Never thought I'd see this money again. Janitors stared at their payslips, tears rolling down their faces. Word spread faster than any official memo ever could. Next came healthcare. A short email directly from the CEO. You choose, the company listens. Attached was a survey link. For the first time in Center Holdings history, employees from the warehouse to the offices had a say in selecting their insurance plan. Many doubted, would anyone actually read my response? Linda not only read them, she hosted 3 open sessions, sitting with HR and staff from every department, listening to each story. A single mother needing child coverage, an older worker with medication costs, a long-haul driver worried about emergency care. Every case was noted, underlined. The following Tuesday, the boardroom doors swung open. Linda presented a new financial report along with a decision. Hire an independent auditing firm. Shady contracts, irregular expenses, everything would be exposed. This was a direct strike at the old guard, those who had profited from the shadows, and, as expected, resistance flared. In one departmental meeting, Brent Wallace, former head of finance, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Sorry, but your financial expertise ends at balancing cleaning invoices, doesn't it? Multi-million-dollar budgets aren't family chores." The room froze. Some held their breath, expecting Linda to be humiliated on the spot, but she calmly opened a folder and set it on the table. "These are the figures from the last 3 quarters," she said slowly. "Please explain why net profit dropped 18% while consulting fees doubled. If you can't, I'll let the auditors publish it." Brent's face flushed red. Murmurs rose. Linda didn't need another word. She had shown she knew every number, far beyond the small bills they thought confined her. But opposition didn't stay public. Rumors began circulating through the halls. "She's just a janitor out for revenge. The company will go bankrupt under this. It's all theater. Wait for the collapse." Some old managers quietly sabotaged. They delayed document approvals, stalled projects, and even filed misleading reports to create an illusion of chaos. Linda knew. She didn't react rashly. Instead, she went straight to the floor. In the warehouse, she spoke with drivers hauling crates. In customer service, she sat with staff through pressure-filled calls. In the cafeteria, she ate lunch alongside janitors. These moments spread quickly, and the whispers of a janitor CEO were drowned out by real stories. "I just had lunch with Linda. She asked sincerely about my daughter. She remembered my name." In face-to-face encounters, Linda chose presence as her weapon. No slogans, just being there, listening, and acting. A week later, she announced a list of promotions. 1. Deborah, HR. Once forced to sign unjust policies, now head of HR with the power to rebuild the system. 2. Alonzo, driver, a veteran, now head of transport. 3. Cynthia, janitorial staff, now supervisor of building services. All 3 fought back tears. They had once thought themselves invisible, and now were recognized before everyone. In parallel, Linda revived Employee Appreciation Day, a tradition long cut. No flashy banners, just long tables, simple meals, a place to gather and speak without fear of being recorded against them. But the more reforms came, the fiercer the resistance. An old guard faction sent anonymous letters to major partners, smearing Linda's leadership. Some key clients began asking, "Is the company stable?" Linda now faced a dilemma. If she failed, people would believe she was nothing more than a janitor with delusions of power. In one tense meeting, an old executive hurled the blunt question, "You really think a janitor can run a corporation?" The room held its breath. Linda replied calmly, but her words cut like glass. "For 15 years, I swept away not only the dirt, but the truths you tried to bury. And now I will sweep away the toxic culture that made employees cry in locker rooms." The room fell dead silent. And yet, even as Linda proved her resolve, one question still lingered in everyone's mind. Why wait 15 years? Why would someone with power from the start choose silence for so long? That unanswered question became the bridge pulling the audience into the next chapter. That question followed Linda everywhere. In the elevator, a young employee asked softly, "You had the power from the start. Why didn't you speak up earlier?" At lunch, Alonzo, now head of transport, looked at her for a long moment and then said, "If you had acted sooner, maybe many of us wouldn't have lost our jobs, wouldn't have suffered injustice." Linda did not dodge the question. She smiled, her eyes deep with the weight of 20 years. "I know, Alonzo. I think about that every day. But there are battles. If you strike too early, you'll be called a liar. If you strike too late, you'll be called a coward. I needed to strike when no one could deny the truth." She sat quietly for a moment, then continued, "Imagine if I had stood up in the first year after Johnson died. They would have said I was acting out of grief, wanting revenge. If I presented a few old papers, they would have laughed. What can a woman with a few old contracts do? They would use lawyers, the press, and power to silence every voice, and I would have truly vanished." Her gaze swept the room where many employees were listening. "But if I remained silent, observing, recording, sooner or later they would reveal their true nature themselves. Each action, each ruthless decision would become evidence. Not something I manufactured, but something they created with their own hands. Linda lifted the black notebook she had filled for 15 years, pages dense with dates, names, and entries. This is not mere note-taking. This is patience. I turned time into an ally. When I walked into that boardroom, they could not simply call me a fantasist. I am the only witness who has seen everything. And a witness patient enough can become a judge. A whisper rose from the back. She waited so no one could deny it. Linda nodded. Yes, I did not choose silence out of fear. I chose silence because I knew that when the truth becomes large enough, it does not need to shout. It only needs to be placed on the table, and everyone will bow. In that moment, the room fell into a different stillness. No more suspicion, no more resentment, only the realization that the waiting had not been meaningless. It had been the strategy of a woman long treated as invisible, who understood the power of time more than anyone. Linda closed the notebook, her voice ringing with resolve. Power is not measured by how long you hold it. Power is measured by whether you dare to use it at the right moment. And that moment, I chose today. The statement landed like a cut through the veil of doubt. Faces that had been tense, skeptical, began to relax. People stopped asking why she had waited so long and started asking themselves, would I have the patience she had if I were in her place? A young man whispered to his friend, she didn't just win because she had proof. She won because she knew how to wait for the right time. Linda smiled. She knew the story was not over. There would still be resistance ahead, still those trying to drag Center Holdings back into the old mire. But after 15 years of silence, now nothing could stop her from speaking the truth. Late on a weekend afternoon, sunlight poured across the Center Holdings courtyard. On the grass between the buildings, small trucks lined up, turned into makeshift food stalls. No banners, no microphones, only laughter, the smell of grilled meat, sweet pastries, and steaming coffee. Linda walked slowly past rows of plastic chairs. In one corner, Alonzo raised his soda can to clink against her paper cup. To the silent ones, he said. Linda smiled. To those unseen, yet carrying this entire building on their shoulders. No more wary glances, no more whispers of doubt. For the first time in years, Center Holdings staff felt like a community, not a cold pyramid of power. 1. Education on respect. In her short speech, Linda spoke neither of profits nor of promises. She asked only one question. Do you remember the name of the janitor on the 3rd floor? No one answered. She nodded. That is the problem. We were taught formulas, taught to memorize KPIs, taught to calculate profit, but we forgot the simplest lesson, to remember someone's name. And when we forget that, we lose the root of education itself, respect for one another. The words made many lower their heads in quiet reflection. 2. Education on patience and observation. Linda held up the black notebook, the very one that had toppled an entire system. I wrote for 15 years, not to take revenge, but to teach myself this. Patience is not silent suffering. Patience is turning time into an ally, observing until the truth grows so large it cannot be denied. Whether you're studying, working, or raising children, remember this. Don't rush to chase the noise. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in quiet waiting, in watching, and in choosing the right moment to act. 3. Education on fairness and responsibility. Her gaze fell on Cynthia, the young mother who had once cried in the locker room when her request for leave was denied. Today, Cynthia smiled, her son recovered, and his hospital fees were covered by the company. Fairness, Linda said, is not a reward to be handed out, nor a slogan to hang on walls. Fairness is responsibility, and responsibility must be chosen every single day. When you sign a document, when you approve a shift, when you reply to an email. If you dismiss it, someone out there will pay in tears. And no company deserves to exist if it breeds tears instead of trust. 4. Education on truth and leadership. That evening, in a small session with the new managers, Linda shared a short story. My father once told me, truth is the strictest teacher. You may skip the class, but you can never skip the test. I let truth be the teacher of this company for 15 years, and when the test came, the liars all failed. To lead, you must first be a good student of truth. If you learn to face it, you'll never fear teaching it to others. The young managers nodded. The lesson was brief, but it stayed with them. 5. A message to the audience. Linda's story is not just about a boardroom upheaval. It is a lesson for all of us. For those who sometimes walk past the cleaner without a greeting, who silence the quiet voice in a meeting, who forget that human worth is never in a title. If you have ever had a Miss Linda in your workplace or classroom, a silent but resilient figure, remember, they may be holding keys you never imagined. And if this story has made you reflect, leave a comment below. Have you ever seen an invisible person suddenly become the center of everything? Share this video so that others can learn the same lesson. Do not underestimate silence. Do not dismiss a uniform. And if you want to keep hearing Undercover Boss, Undercover CEO, Undercover Owner stories, hit subscribe. This is where we learn to lead with kindness and to live with fairness. 6. Closing symbolic image. Before leaving the gathering, Linda walked down the familiar hallway, once the place where Wexler mocked her with the words, "You missed a spot." The old carpet had since been replaced, but Linda paused, brushing her hand along the edge. No stain, no contempt, only light reflecting from the Center Holdings logo, now with a small line added beneath, "Respect before titles." Linda smiled. She knew the fight would never truly end, but at least today, the lesson had been planted. And perhaps somewhere, another janitor, another driver, another quiet worker was also beginning to see their own chance. If this story made you stop and think, don't keep it to yourself. Share it so more people realize that human worth is never defined by titles, but by how we treat one another. Leave a comment. Have you ever met an invisible person who changed the way you see the world? And don't forget to hit subscribe to follow more Undercover Boss, Undercover CEO, Undercover Owner stories, where together we learn to lead with kindness and to live with fairness.